Good morning, YouTube. Welcome to the Reptile Barn. Very excited to bring you this video today. I've got Big Dan out. He hasn't been on the vlog in a while. And I've been wanting to do an in-depth discussion of husbandry for Dominican Red Mountain Boas. So, let's jump right into it. I'm first going to talk real briefly about like 3 points that I feel like are important to talk about husbandry for any reptile, and then I'll get into some of the specifics because this is a very unique species. You cannot just throw it in there and be like, oh, I'll keep it like I would keep a carpet python or like a boa constrictor or like a corn snake. You can't base it off of another animal. There are some specific things that I feel are important in their husbandry. But first, general stuff. Reptiles need a temperature gradient. Okay, I'm not going to do a big huge video on what a temperature gradient is, but they all need one. So please, if you are going to get a snake like this or any other reptile, really make sure you understand what a temperature gradient is, how to measure what your temperatures really are, surface temperatures as opposed to ambient temperatures and all of that, because it's very important. Second, humidity. Many reptiles, especially ones kept in captivity, are semi-tropical or tropical in nature. And most of us in the United States, and if there's any of you watching from other countries, I know most of Canada, most of Western Europe, our humidity just doesn't cut it, especially in the wintertime when we've got heaters running, drying out our air even further. So you gotta find a way to safely boost their humidity. And I say safely because depending on what your substrate is, what your enclosure is made of and all that, you can't necessarily just spray every day and call it good. You might have mold problems. If everything's wet constantly, they're gonna get scale problems. You want humidity, not wetness. So I'm not gonna give you specifics on how often to spray and all that because that depends on your house, where you are, what your humidity already is. And third, exercise. Reptiles, believe it or not, they move. And when we keep them in captivity, often we have them in an enclosure that either isn't the right dimensions or it's just straight not big enough, or we don't get them out frequently enough, and they end up getting overweight because they don't get exercise. They need exercise. They don't need to run a marathon, but they should at least come out and get handled frequently. I'm talking very regularly, several times a week. This is for all reptiles, not just these guys. You might be able to think of a couple of exceptions, but in general, if you're getting a pet reptile, it should get some exercise. So, on to specifics. This is a Dominican Red Mountain Boa, Chilabothrus striatus. They are from Hispaniola. So, tropical island type weather. There are a few very unique things about them. They are, as far as I'm aware, the only boids that do not have heat pits. Take a look. I don't know if the camera's going to zoom in when he's moving like that, but no heat pits. Gives them this really gorgeous, smooth face. I just love it. So, it's just a unique fact about them. I can't give you the scientific reason why, but I can give you my guess. So, moving on to the next thing that will kind of tie in, these are considered semi-arboreal. They're not a true arboreal like a green tree python or something like that. They won't be happy, for example, if they only have tiny, skinny little branches, then you're expecting them to dangle off of them like you would some of the true arboreals. But they do love to climb. Now, the reason that I think this is tied back to why they don't have heat pits, this is just a random guess, guys. I don't have any data for you. As babies, these guys are very arboreal. Stay in the trees almost constantly. As they get size and they age, they come to the ground more and more and more and more. And I'm talking in nature, not just in a cage setting, right? In an enclosure. In nature, when they're seen in the wild, that is typically how it is. The babies stay in the trees and the adults are both, right? Coming to the ground more and more. Now, that means that the babies are not probably going to be hunting rodents. because they're going to be hunting things that primarily stay in the trees. Small lizards and maybe baby birds. It's very difficult to get baby Dominican Red Mountain Boas to eat rodents. It's very easy once they get some size on them. That makes sense because of their nature, like we just talked about. I believe that that even can tie into their heat pits. A heat pit is not going to pick up little frogs and lizards, specifically lizards, in the trees because it's a reptile, right? It's not going to be hotter than its environment. So it's really, it would be a waste, evolutionarily speaking, for them to have developed and continued to maintain highly developed heat pits, because their primary prey, when they're young, doesn't give off a heat signature. That's just a random guess, could be totally wrong, and the adults do eat rodents in the wild, so maybe I'm off, but that's just a guess that I wanted to throw out there. But that's something as a keeper to be aware of. If you get a newborn, it very well may not take rodents, so you need to talk with the breeder a lot. Make sure you know what it's eating and that you have access to that prey item, whether that's hatchling quail or little feeder anoles or geckos or something like that. You don't want to bring a perfectly healthy snake home that's been eating great, assume that it was eating, little baby mice, and then it just won't eat for you anymore. That would be really stressful. Then you're trying to track down lizards, and it can be a nightmare. So just something to be aware of. But they do switch to rodents pretty easily as they age. Ours have been on rodents, and they give us no problems at all. They're fantastic eaters. Anyway, so we talked about the branches a little bit. Basically, what you want to do inside the enclosure, you want to have platforms as opposed to just skinny branches, right? So that they feel like they can climb and move vertically through the enclosure and rest at different heights. But they're not going to want to just drape over one branch, if that makes sense. So you want to have either really thick branches up high or just straight platforms that they can rest on. The enclosure should be fairly large. They're a pretty active snake, and they're pretty long. They like to move around. We keep them right now in, I believe, like 4 foot by like 18 inches deep and like 3 feet high. We're actually switching. We ordered new cages for a few reasons, and the new ones are going to be 3 feet wide, 4 feet tall, and 2 or even 3 feet deep. I think 2 feet deep. So a little more height, not quite as much width, but they'll be in good shape. You do need to have some floor space because, again, the adults spend a lot of time on the ground. You can't just go with a true arboreal setup, right? But if you can give them some height, they'll appreciate it and they will climb. One of the reasons we're switching, though, to a different cage, we want a cage, because our current ones we built ourselves and we lined the sides with cork. The cork is hard to clean. We ordered already animal plastics cages. It's all plastic on the inside. Much easier to clean, especially because these snakes, of all the species of reptiles I have ever kept, nothing has pee like a Dominican Red Mountain Boa. They pee regularly, very frequently, and once it dries, it hardens like cement. It is so difficult to scrape off of our cork walls and floor and everywhere else they get their pee. It is really difficult. I can't stress that enough. It is difficult. Now, you can help this somewhat, because moving on to my next thing, we highly recommend very large water bowls, both for humidity and because virtually every single person I've talked to said that their Dominican Red Mountain Boas love to swim. And I feel like if every single one of them wants to be in the water regularly, that's an indicator that part of their just standard care should be that they have a big basin to soak in. Now, they will frequently pee in the water, where it's easier to clean their water bowl. So that's a good thing, not a bad thing. That means that you're going to be kind of forced to very regularly clean their water, and you're not going to have so much pee out in the enclosure where you're scraping it off with a chisel. Literally. It can be really hard. Anyway, so those are some other unique things about them. A couple other things I want to mention before we close the video. They seem to want lower temperatures than other boas that I have heard of. When we first got them, our basking spot was at about 90, 91 degrees. They wouldn't use it. they wouldn't use it until I dropped it down to more like 87, 88 degrees, and then they use it regularly, like all my other reptiles. So that's something to consider. If you've kept boas before especially, and you think you've got it all ready to go, check your temps. You want the basking spot a little bit cooler, and you want your ambient temperatures a little bit cooler than another boa, and your nighttime drop can be 10 or 15 degrees. It can be pretty significant. So just something to think about. It's not difficult. It's just, be aware of it if you're going to get this particular species. Like some of the rainbow boas, which they do have some of that iridescence, but they're not actually a rainbow boa. But like them, some people group breed them. They'll put multiple females, and I've even heard some people doing multiple males in the same enclosure to breed. I'm fascinated by this. We only have a pair, so I'm not going to be able to do that right now, but I think it's very interesting that with most reptiles you would not want to do that, but with them it seems to work great. In fact, I've heard that it actually increases your viability, right? How many of your females go and how well their litters do and everything like that. So something to think about if you ever wanted to breed them. This individual, this is Big Dan, our male. He's full grown. They're not a big, thick-bodied snake. Again, I know I've been stressing it, but very unique species of snake. They're not all big and bulky like most boas, but pretty long. I mean, he's over 6 feet long, believe it or not. This little guy curled up on my one hand is just over 6 feet long. So he is a red phase Dominican Red Mountain Boa. It's pretty late at night now. He's starting to color up, which is something they do, kind of like, maybe like a crested gecko or something. One of the species that colors up or fires up. They tend to do it at night, and he's not all the way colored up yet. 2 or 3 more hours, he's going to be pretty significantly red. It's really amazing to watch, and he's peeing on me. That's fantastic. As I said, they pee regularly. I often get peed on when I handle them. He's not scared. He's totally fine. He just needed to pee. Anyway, there are other color variants of Dominican Red Mountain Boas. There's pastels, they call them. There's ones that are more gray and silver. They're just gorgeous. There's some that tend more towards red and some more towards orange. There's your typical span of browns and tans and things like that. Every single one of them is absolutely gorgeous. So look around. If you want to get one of these, it doesn't have to look just like this one. Look and figure out what your favorites are. There's plenty of breeders. Go on Facebook. There's a group for Dominican Red Mountain Boas, and there's people breeding them. So they're not super popular in the hobby, but you can find plenty of different color variants of captive bred Dominican Red Mountain Boas, which I just think is awesome. I hope that they get even more popular. They're very awesome. The last thing I want to talk about, in fact, is their temperament. Very, very, very good handling snake. A little bit more curious than your typical ball python. Not that ball pythons can't be, but you do get plenty of ball pythons that pretty much just want to curl up, hide their head away, and sit there until you put them back in their cage. These guys, they're a little bit more curious. I've been holding him for a long time, so he's getting a little, he's starting to chill out. But they will be a very involved handling snake for you. They're curious, they move around, but not too fast. They're not flailing. They just are curious. They really aren't biters. Like most snakes, if you handle them regularly, they will get socialized to you, and they lose their fear of people very easily, and they become very rewarding captive snake. So they can pee on you, and it's a little bit gross, as you're seeing on my arm, but it's not very much, and if you keep reptiles, you probably have been peed on before. They can musk, but again, they really don't. If you handle them regularly so they're used to you, I don't think maybe at the beginning when we first got them and pulled them out of the shipping container, they musked, but really they don't musk. Again, not biters. Their mouth isn't particularly big or scary, so even if they were to bite, I don't think it'd be a particularly bad bite. Really, though, this was a dream animal for me. I love these snakes. I cannot say enough good things about them. If you can nail down those couple of more unique aspects of their husbandry, which is why we made this video, I think you would be hard pressed to find a more rewarding pet snake. They really are awesome. Long lived, like most of the boas, so it'll be with you for a long time. I just love them. Great eaters. Other than, you know, sometimes a small winter fast, which is normal for tons of snakes. They're really not picky eaters at all. We've switched between little rabbit kits, mice, rats, gerbils, live, frozen thawed. I'm sure they would happily take quail if I offered it to them. They're just great eaters. Can't say enough good things about them. So please, if you are considering a pet snake and you've looked at the typical corn snakes, ball pythons, you know, boa constrictors, and nothing has quite caught your fancy, you want something a little different but not going to break the bank, consider a Dominican Red Mountain Boa. I've touched on most of the aspects of their husbandry. You know, there's nothing really crazy in there. I tend to think that even a nocturnal snake like this, if it was given a little bit of UV during the day, that would be beneficial. If they don't want it, they'll go into their little hide box, you know. But I think that animals tend to do well if there's some UV, some sunlight, right? So that's something I didn't really touch on because I know that's kind of controversial in the hobby. But if you want to add, you know, a small UV lamp somewhere by the basking spot, for example, I think that would be spectacular. We are going to in the new enclosures. We didn't in these enclosures. So the last several years they haven't had any. I think we're going to in the new enclosures. So just something else to think about. Anyway, I'm going to close up. I know it's been a long video. I tried to talk fast, but I wanted to touch on everything so that someone has a reference. They can say, oh, I'm going to get this animal. I want to go to one source to be able to figure out, oh, what do I need? So there you go. I hope you enjoyed it. Please comment below, especially if I missed anything that you think is important. We really appreciate your support. And until next time, this is the Reptile Barn.